level up the leadership of self and others so they can become thriving leaders with thriving teams.
When did you discover your love for dance if you always just heard music and started moving?
Because when your mind and your heart are in co-creation, then you will be able to use the power of both.
What if someone comes to you and says, I've been a really tough leader, but I haven't really been living my best life as you described in your book?
And we did this beautiful project together where we helped women prepare for job interviews.
Sometimes the heart can mislead you. Your heart might feel something, then your brain is saying no. And
Okay.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Fit Over 40 and in Coach's Corner. Today I have Regina Huber. She is a transformational leadership coach, an inspirational speaker, and a best-selling author, and the host of Rise to Lead podcast. I'm excited to have her in. Her resume looks pretty sharp. Let's have her introduce herself and tell everybody about herself, and we'll get to the questions.
Yeah, hi, Clarence. It's a true pleasure to be on here with you today.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Mhm.
I am very much looking forward to our conversation here. And I do hope that it will be inspiring to our listeners. So we'll do our best to make it so. As you suggested, I'm going to share a little bit of my story, which is quite eclectic, actually. I have lived and traveled a lot on 5 continents. And as a transformational leadership coach and trainer at my company, my current company, Transform Your Performance, I help my clients level up the leadership of self and others so they can become thriving leaders with thriving teams. And, of course, this implies upgrading leadership, presence, and skills and keeping stress levels low and all the good stuff, but also accelerating their own careers. And I also like to inspire the people I work with to create what I call a freaking amazing life, which includes, of course, also fulfillment, wellness, health, and and everything else that makes a life worth living, so to speak. And that's also the title of my newest book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life, which people can find on Amazon in English and Portuguese for now. So my eclectic experience started in Germany in a tiny little village. I grew up on a farm and was extremely shy as a little girl, but then also at the same time very adventurous and curious. And that's how I decided to leave Germany in my early 20s, first to Spain, and then I never stopped moving really. So um, I've held leadership roles at a global consulting firm as a manager and leader in several different locations on several continents, and I've also owned 3 businesses in Argentina, Brazil, and the US. And in 2012, when I moved to New York City, I was trying to figure out how to fit it all into something meaningful that could make a difference for people, that I could coach people with, but in my very unique way. And this is how Transform Your Performance was eventually born. And and this is also what aligns with my own passion. So yeah.
Love it. I love it. All right. You talk a lot about mindset, obviously, but you also had a concept that I've never heard before, and that's heart set. So tell me what heart set means.
Well, you know, I even lately have added feeling set, and I
Oh,
wrote a LinkedIn article about this. But let's first talk about heart set, maybe because I have been talking about this much more, also on podcasts, but also with my clients, of course. Not only in the context of heart-centered leadership, which I think we all agree is key as well. Uh, the mindset and heart set, I have made that one of the pillars of one of my leadership frameworks, actually. And the framework is called Powerful Leadership Transformation. The first pillar of it is a self-empowering mindset and heart set, because I just believe that they are better together. Because when your mind and your heart are in co-creation, then you will be able to use the power of both. We usually think of our mind as our intellectual power. Of course, it's much more than that. It also includes our programming, our conditioning. It includes the subconscious and the conscious, right? But all of this together is very, very helpful and very sometimes, well, it can also be limiting, of course, in certain circumstances, depending on how we are conditioned. But of course, we want to harness this intellectual power that we have available. On the other hand, though, we also have our I-specific or you-specific Clarence wisdom, and that is what we store in our hearts. And no one else has that but you, because you have gathered your unique wisdom through your unique experiences, right? And it's really important to remember that the heart, we often call it we say it's a part of the brain. Why? Because it has about 40,000 brain-like cells. And the magnetic field of the heart can actually be up to 5,000 times stronger than the head brain. So it's really important to remember that we as people connect through the heart, through this electromagnetic field that the heart emanates. And we tend to forget about this because we often think, oh, the heart doesn't have anything to do with business, but that's not really true. I also like to talk about the heart in the context of people being the heart of an organization. So that's then more in the context of heart-centered leadership. We must not forget that too, because no organization is anything without the people in it.
Absolutely. You seem very passionate when you talk and as you come through, and that energy jumps off the screen here. How did you develop and dive into your passion?
Well, see, passion also has to do with the heart, right? We say that at least. And courage is in the heart and fear is in the mind. So yes, when you have that passion, you probably automatically find that courage in your heart a little bit more easily, because when you don't have passion for something, then why would you even want to do it if you're fearful,
Yeah.
right? And courage is really about doing something despite the fear. So we got to move through the fear. That's what the courage is for. And courage is really also in our hearts. Now, as I said before, I was extremely shy for a long time in my life, not just as a little girl, but also as a teenager. And to me, even just moving to the city was a major step, although I wanted to do it. So that alone required that courage. I didn't think twice about it on the one hand, but on the other hand, I also really needed to overcome my shyness so that I could make new contacts. And this, was also true, of course, when I moved to Spain. I had just started learning Spanish at the time. So I didn't always follow all the conversations. It was a bit challenging. This was at a time when there was no internet. It was just about to start. And,
Wow.
there was also at a time when calling home was very expensive. And when you wouldn't just fly home like twice a year, even though it might only have been 2.5 hours away in flight time. So it was quite different times. And so for me, it did require an adaptation because Spain was not a very familiar ground for me. It was very different culturally at the time to me. I had traveled to Italy a few times. It's not so far from Bavaria, where I grew up in, and never really been to Spain. It was a bit of a culture shock. Although later, of course, I traveled much farther away and I lived in places like Argentina, Brazil, and I've traveled quite a bit in Africa now too.
That's amazing. Hmm. What do you mean by body and energy conscious? What does that mean to the average layperson?
Yes, I talk about body and energy consciousness in the context of presence. So we talk about, executive presence, business presence, leader presence. I believe that oftentimes when it comes to presence or executive presence, people write about it, talk about it, but we don't really know exactly what it consists of. And there are a lot of different aspects to it, though. It really includes everything. It includes our energy. I'm going to talk about that more for sure. It includes our attitude, our body language, of course. The way we speak, the tone of our voice, our voice quality. Really, how we show up, right? And of course, we talk about authenticity a lot in leadership because authenticity helps us come across as trustworthy,
Yes.
and it helps us build trust in our teams and with our business partners and all the other stakeholders. So we want to have a trustworthy leader presence and come across as credible. Now, because so much flows into that presence, we want to be aware of what exactly flows into that presence. And one aspect that we often forget about is our energy. And energy, however, is one of the most important pieces of it. I learned this a lot through dance, actually, because in partner dance, for example, also in other dances, but in partner dance specifically, where you have a leader and a follower, they can only communicate if the energy is communicated, if the intention is communicated. Yes, you also communicate it through the embrace, through body language, through indications, maybe by whatever, right, the body. But it's also about the energy you give your intention, so that you can actually communicate with the follower that is supposed to understand what you want them to do. And we do not communicate with words in dance, right? So I learned a lot about energy in dance, but also through my holistic studies. I studied quite a few holistic modalities, like, that are related to health, but it's, of course, because they're holistic, it's not just physical health, it's overall health and it's overall well-being. And that's also where we learn to understand our energy better. And authenticity is about how we show up, right? So, for example, do you convey confidence to your team? Do you convey vision through your presence? What's your attitude? Is it aligned with your words? It's all about alignment. Alignment of thoughts, words, attitude, behavior, actions, values, body language, energy, and all of that together makes up your presence. So in that, it's important to remember that it only takes about 0.07 seconds for our brains to figure out whether we can trust someone. And that, again, is about our energy.
All right, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, and I'm gonna push back on something you said because we hear a lot in our culture and that we follow our heart. Sometimes the heart can mislead you. Your heart might feel something, then your brain is saying no. And you mentioned, having good heart energy. So how would you, let's say someone says, "Hey, my heart has been wrong a lot." How would you push back on that?
Yeah. So first of all, we say we follow our heart when we really, so in several different situations, right? When we make decisions most of the time, and also sometimes, and it also has to do with decisions really, but when we just have this intuitive this intuitive push or urge to go after a desire, right? Which again is also a decision, really. So let's look at it in the context of decision making. A lot of times we make decisions based on so-called facts. That can sometimes work quite well. And it's a really good idea to do your due diligence. For example, when you want to work with somebody, when you want to partner up with somebody for a business, for example, or when you want to hire somebody, right? it's a good idea to do your due diligence, or when you want to start a new job at a specific company. You look it up and you do your research, obviously, yes. And sometimes when it comes to important life decisions, we cannot make those alone with our intellect alone, because that's why it's so hard for people to do those pro and con lists. If anything, I always say do a pro and pro list. That's much more helpful than a pro and con list oftentimes. But to come back to that heart, because our intuition has a role. We don't have it for nothing. Our intuition is very important. It's our inner voice. It's actually what knows best what's best for us.
Mm-hmm. A lot of
And
times,
sometimes,
sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I
No,
was
I just
just,
wanted to add one little
all
thought,
right.
because sometimes, so-called facts turn out to not even be facts.
Well, welcome to America. We don't use facts anymore.
Anywhere,
Right.
there's like,
It's based on what tribe you're in. So depending on
exactly,
who's talking, the facts may be true, maybe not, and it doesn't matter. It just depends. So
exactly. And
um
they may seem true to you, but not to
right.
somebody else. And in school, we learn a bunch of lies too. A lot of what we study in school is not even true. It's something they want us to believe. So,
Mhm.
what are facts anyway? I say sometimes. Yes, I suggest always to use both your intellect and your intuition. And you, and in the context of the intellect, yes, of course, the information you think you can rely on.
Mhm. Very good. Okay, so you mentioned dance. You love to dance. When did you discover your love for dance? Have you always just heard music and started moving?
Look, I grew up in a tiny little village in Bavaria, and there wasn't that much to choose from. There was some folkloric dancing, and I actually did a little bit of that first. And then I also learned to play the accordion, and then later I didn't like that anymore. And, you know, I started finding out about different things in the world.
Mhm.
I do remember that as a little girl, my grandfather taught me how to dance the waltz.
Okay.
And then I also liked to watch the very rare, at the time, very rare dance competitions on TV. I do remember that. But of course, this was sort of my small world back then. Later, when I moved to Munich, I discovered Latin dancing. So I did some of that. Also, then I moved to Spain. There was more of it. And so I got into the whole, salsa, blah, 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 all of that, tango, Argentine tango. Later, I moved to Brazil at some point. Well, also Argentina. I translated some books on Argentine tango, even. And in Brazil, there are dances that you cannot find easily outside of Brazil. Although I also studied samba in Munich, and right now I mostly actually love African dances, such as the Congolese ndombolo, one of my favorites. The Senegalese sabar I started studying not too long ago, and some other dances, right? Or some Afrofusion, some Afrobeats. So whatever I can get a hold of, really, and it depends on where I am and what's
Mhm.
available.
Okay, so speaking of Africa, you've been to Africa.
Mhm.
What did you do when you were in Africa, and what was the purpose of that mission?
Yeah, so the first time I was in Africa was actually in Morocco in the north. That was for a vacation trip quite a few years ago. And then I started traveling also work related. That started with Ghana. I did a project with a lady there who helped young women prepare for job interviews. Originally, this was going to be like a big event, and that event was actually going to be a summit. It was canceled last minute because of some of the important people not being available, whatever. But I decided to travel anyway, and we did this beautiful project together where we helped women prepare for job interviews and get jobs. Then from there, I traveled directly to South Africa to speak at a conference at the time. Then the next trip to Africa was, I think it was back to South Africa, but I've been to South Africa multiple times since then for several different projects and conference speaking. And I've always just extended my trips. Cold New York winters don't sit so well with me. So I just try to escape New York a month or two, usually in the winter. And I extended my trips. I combined work and pleasure. So, and I can really, work with my coaching clients from anywhere as long as I have internet. So that makes it easier, of course. Then I went to Cameroon. I co-hosted a summit at a hotel in Yaoundé together with two other women, and I also spoke at another event there. Cameroon was a shorter trip. I was there 10 days. I also brought back malaria from Cameroon, but that's a different story. And then after that, what did I do? Qatar, that's not Africa, of course. And then I also spent a month in Uganda, did some work with a leadership institute there, and then another month in Rwanda, crossed over from Uganda. And that was 2019, 2020. And actually for 2020, I had a lot of Africa travel scheduled and also already signed off on, and then we know what happened, right? So it was, of course, all canceled. I did go back again to Zanzibar at some point, though that was not for work. I spent a month in Zanzibar. Now, right now, this week, I was supposed to be in South Africa, but that was moved. And last week, I was supposed to be in Angola, and that was moved too. So it's going to come at some point.
You coach a lot of women. What are some of the challenges that women face?
Well, I believe that in corporate specifically, women oftentimes have at least that's what they come to me for, right? They have a harder time sometimes to be visible enough. And so what we work on is really also presence. We mentioned that before, right? We also, of course, work on negotiation skills because women tend to sometimes under negotiate their salaries, for example.
Yes.
So I have also come up or created a specific framework around that topic. I help them become more visible and more confident about asking for promotions, for example. There are a lot of different topics, but I would say these are the most common ones.
Gotcha. I see. Well, tell me a little bit about your coaching. Does it start off with the interview process and you identify problems and then you coach from there? Or are you working off a plan that you've put together over the years?
My coaching comes about very organically. We definitely have a strategy conversation in the beginning to even figure out whether it's the right fit.
Sure.
Once we've decided on that, there is a tool that I use, although we don't always use that, which is a ROI plan, so to speak. So you can determine what you want to achieve, and then we follow it. We just follow up on it, and it's more for the coaching client, for the coachee themselves, so they can follow their own progress and measure it. What I do always use is what I call a starter checklist. This is a combination of a self-assessment tool, simple one, nothing very complex, but it really inspires and requests the coaching client to sit down and think about what their situation truly is and what they really want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our starting point. And it also gives me, in addition, additional information that I might not have been able to gather through our first conversation. From there, we go into our coaching programs. We sort of define what we want to work on first, but oftentimes it changes.
Yes. Mhm.
It
Yeah.
changes quite quickly sometimes.
Yeah. Anytime you're coaching, things come up and then it changes the trajectory of the
Yeah.
conversation. I love the title of your book. What inspired you to sit down and write a book? That's a lot of work sometimes. Sometimes.
Yeah. This is my second book, actually. It is my third book, but the first one was a smaller one, and I actually no longer sell that. So, yes, this book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life, Create the Life You Want.
Love the title.
No, create the life that's perfect for you anywhere in the world. That's how I wrote the subtitle. Is is a combination of, you know, real life stories of my own life, right? Because it's very eclectic and adventurous. Oftentimes I've heard from people, Regina, when are you finally going to write your book? And I was putting it off and putting it off. I had started once because I thought it was probably a really great idea, but then I was putting it off because I was trying to figure out how to make it most meaningful and most valuable for the reader, right? Because it's not just about me. I didn't just want to write a biography. I mean, you know, what's that good for, right? So I wanted it to be inspirational and a little bit educational in terms of leadership of self and others at the same time. So at the end of each chapter, I have added a portion that is specifically about leadership and what I've learned through that chapter's experience for the leadership of either myself or others or both. And so it's a combination of a leadership book, a an adventurous life travel book, and an inspirational book to that my intention is to also really inspire people to live life on their terms, to uh, to find the courage to do that and to express themselves in who they are, to live their essence, to lead not only as you know, as a manager in a company, but also lead their own lives.
Mhm. I'm gonna give you a tough one. Um, you talk about people, living their true identity and being passionate. A lot of times in leadership roles, you're supposed to be tough and unbendable sometimes, and just, you know, you take on, for lack of a better explanation, this is some masculine qualities. What if someone comes to you and says, I've been a really tough leader, but I haven't really been living my best life as you described in your book, and I really want to change my image so that my employees or people who follow me feel comfortable talking to me? How would you go? You don't have to give me your whole playbook, but just give me a little.
No, yeah. So first of all, do we really need to be tough as a leader? You know?
It's all perception, I guess. That's why I'm asking.
Right. So yeah, I always like to challenge people to maybe question their paradigms a little bit. That's probably also why I called one of my leadership frameworks New Paradigm Leadership, because I would really like to inspire leaders to rethink leadership and whether it needs to be that toughness.
Mhm.
What if we could soften up a little bit and be more humane, and more human? Because we also say we cannot bring emotions to the workplace, but yeah, we may not want to cry all day. I'm not talking about that, but humans are emotional beings. We
Yes.
are Emotions are a part of us. We cannot just put them in a closet at the door. It's just not possible. So we need to respect these human aspects more, I think, in leadership. I like to talk about humanizing the workplace. When you respect your people, when you really show up authentically instead of as the tough one, then people will actually automatically trust you more. Just try it out. I'm not saying you, I don't know how you lead, right?
I
But
need
in,
to
in
try more
general,
humanity.
right? But in general, right? What if you feel like you have to be so tough, maybe that's just a facade that you're putting on, and then you have to play this role and you're not really
It's
comfortable in the role.
it's an insecurity,
Yeah.
big
And then
time.
yeah, and then it's very stressful to play different roles all the time, while if you and tiring. So and then always you will probably always fear that people sometime, might see behind the mask. And that's not really what we want. We want leaders who are transparent in that way. We want to know what they stand for. We want to know, what they think, because we want to know whether we can trust them. If
Absolutely.
you constantly put on a mask, I don't know whether I can trust you.
Yes.
So the toughness, I don't know. I mean, some people are naturally tough, and maybe that's a strength in their particular environment. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying use your own strengths, uncover them, take the time to practice self awareness.
Hmm.
I also call these strengths sometimes your unique assets. We don't value enough what our unique brilliance is. And maybe in that organization where you are the leader, they need exactly that right now.
Yeah. Some compassion, some empathy, which I think are
Yeah.
strong things because they're the opposite of the others, which requires you to be strong to exhibit those. So it's kind of a oxymoron, if you will. Um, I love the thought process. I love the way you think things through. Where can people find out more about you? Maybe have to get some coaching from you and learn from you and order the book too. Where can they find all that information?
Yes. All the information is actually on my website, transformyourperformance.com. You have individual pages with my coaching frameworks, my approach, as well as my podcast and my books. So everything is there. You can also find me on LinkedIn, of course, and on other social media. The books are on Amazon, of course. And yeah,
How
that's
often
about
do
it.
you
I
do
have a YouTube channel, but again, it's all on my website.
All right, very good. How often do you do your podcast?
Weekly,
Weekly. Okay, very good. And the name of your podcast?
it is Rise to Lead.
Rise to Lead. I love it. All right, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, Regina Huber. Thank you for coming on and sharing your insight with us. And we'll be back next week, as always, folks.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.